With the introduction of supply drop weapons in Black Ops 3 also comes the discussion of pay-to-win weapons. At the time of this video, there's been just a handful of new weapons released. Unfortunately, all of these weapons can only be obtained from supply drops. And so far, there's been a lot of speculation about whether some of these are simply reskins of weapons already in the game, or if they contain different stats altogether. So in this video, I'll be comparing the standard combat knife against 6 of its supply drop counterparts: the wrench, the brass knuckles, the butterfly knife, the Fury Song sword, the Iron Gym crowbar, and lastly, the Shadowclaw crossbow's bayonet attachment. When I was researching what the community thought before doing my own testing, I was floored by some of the comments I saw. Some people assumed that all these weapons were the same as the combat knife, whereas others were claiming that each of the new melee weapons were far superior to it. One thing I'll tell you for certain, without the proper testing, the animations for all of these weapons can be quite deceiving. I went through and hand tested each of these weapons without actually owning any myself. I had some of my subscribers who had these weapons already meet me in a private match so that I could test them. And to those of you who assisted me or sent me in clips, I couldn't have done this testing without you guys. And for that, I'm very gracious. So now on to the testing. Let me first say that testing these weapons was painstakingly difficult. Measuring data for melee weapons is much harder than testing actual gun stats. There's so many variables that can play a role, such as where you're standing, where your target is standing, and so forth. Trying to figure out all these numbers took me well over 3 hours of analyzing animations frame by frame. Now with that said, I'm fairly confident that all of my results are accurate, and I stand by them. I tried my best to ensure that the same distance and the same scenarios were accomplished in each weapon tested. I just wanted to give you a heads up that should anyone feel the need to double check my numbers, unless you're in the exact spots I was in, your results may vary a bit from my own. There were 5 categories I tested for each melee weapon: the swinging animation against no target, the weapon movement speed, the time it takes to slash and kill a single enemy, the time it takes between double kills, or essentially recovery time per kill, and lastly, the lunge distance. My goal isn't to bore you here with the actual testing, so where I can, I'll try and sum up the repetitive things. And speaking of which, let's start with weapon movement speed. I set up a little obstacle course here on Nuketown to time each of these melee weapons. As a baseline, the combat knife took 4.550 seconds to complete. It wasn't much of a surprise to find out that all 6 of the weapons were identical to the combat knife. They all provided a result of 4.550 seconds, indicating that they all move at the same speed. Next, let's talk about the time it takes to kill a single enemy. I measured from the first frame when the attack begins until the very moment where the kill feed begins to show the kill. For the combat knife, the time was 0.133 seconds. Surprisingly, all of the supply drop weapons also clocked in at this 0.133 seconds, except for one. This time was difficult to test as it was highly dependent on the distance of you and your enemy. If you were right in the enemy's face, this time would be even quicker. My goal was to measure the furthest distance I could that still would connect with the enemy. The one weapon that differed was the wrench, which had a time of 0.117 seconds. This definitely could have been user error on my part though, but I should note that the difference between 0.117 seconds and 0.133 seconds was literally only 1 frame at the slowest speed in Sony Vegas, which is what I used to edit these clips. Next, the swing animation against no enemy. The combat knife offered a swing time of 0.650 seconds. And the results here surprised me, as some of the animations look way longer than others. However, the Iron Gym, the wrench, the Fury Song, and the butterfly knife all matched the combat knife at 0.650 seconds. There were only 2 that differed from this time. The first one was the crossbow with the bayonet, which was noticeably slower at 0.800 seconds. More surprisingly was the brass knuckles. Many of you may have heard the rumor that swinging with your left was faster than your right, and much to my surprise, this is true. The left swing animation was 0.500 seconds. The right swing animation matched the combat knife at 0.650 seconds. Now the 2 stats you're probably anxious to hear. First, we'll do what I like to call the recovery time in between rapid kills. So the way I tested this was to line up 2 or more enemies and rapidly kill them. I measured by starting the clock the moment the kill feed shows the first kill until the moment the kill feed begins to show the second kill. I repeated these several times each to make sure my numbers were accurate, but I'll only be showing one of each to save some time. So the combat knife had a time of 1.150 seconds between kills. The Fury Song sword offered the exact same recovery time between kills, 1.150 seconds. And by the way, this obviously remains the same for longer kill chains. As you can see here, Going from a double kill to a triple kill still has a 1.150 second delay between each kill. Next, the butterfly knife. This was a popular one that people said was way faster than the combat knife, but as testing shows, it also has a time of 1.150 seconds between kills. Now the rest of the weapons differ from the combat knife in this category. The wrench continually clocked in at 0.867 seconds between kills, which gives it a slight boost when it comes to rapid kills over the combat knife. And the brass knuckles is where it got bizarre. So remember that I said the left swing with the brass knuckles is faster than the right swing. It turns out that despite this, the right swing is capable of a faster recovery time. The right swing clocked in at 0.850 seconds, and when I tested the left, it had a time of 0.950 seconds. I repeated this test multiple times and always came to the same conclusion. So if you want to get rapid kills with the brass knuckles, you'll want to use the right swing. Next, the crossbow with the bayonet attached had a time of 0.817 seconds, making it the second fastest weapon to kill multiple enemies with. And finally, the fastest melee weapon when it comes to recovery time between kills is the Iron Gem crowbar. This had a time of 0.750 seconds. So the Iron Gem can kill two people 35% faster than the combat knife. Lastly, let's talk about lunge range. Again, this was very difficult to precisely test. I used tiles on the ground behind one of these houses on Nuketown here. By placing my foot behind the starting tile and having my enemy as far back as possible, and then gradually having them scoot forward until within lunging range, I was able to get a fairly decent idea of how far each weapon could lunge. I'll show you the combat knife first for reference. Note that I did go into theater mode to get a better perspective of the approximate lunge distances. Oddly though, despite my foot being behind the first tile line in first person perspective, theater mode always showed it slightly over the line. So here's the approximate lunge distance for the combat knife in graph format. As it turns out, all the weapons have the exact same lunge range except for one. I did have some very slight variations for some of them, such as the sword, but this is likely from the stance some of the enemies had from holding certain weapons, or of course due to my foot being over the line. Basically, this yellow line right here represents the variation I received. The enemy's front foot would usually be somewhere in this yellow line, but never beyond it. Now the one weapon that had a different lunge range is the crossbow with the bayonet. I'm going to show you 3 different clips here to demonstrate just how potent this can be. First, from my perspective. While it may not look that devastating at first glance, take note of where the enemy's feet are. Now let me show you a clip from theater mode. Did you see that? He did the truffle shuffle across the entire damn map. However, this clip didn't give the exact distance justice. Here's one more clip, and again, take note of where the enemy's foot is.
What the fuck was that?
So this red line is the lunge range of the crossbow with the bayonet. By my visual estimates, the bayonet attachment offers a 25% greater lunge distance than the combat knife and all other melee weapons. And that, as they say, is that. Again, the things you want to take away from this video are the following. All supply drop melee weapons have the exact same movement speed. The wrench kills a single enemy slightly faster than all other melee weapons. The Iron Gem crowbar can kill 2 people rapidly 35% faster than the combat knife. The right brass knuckle can kill rapidly faster than the left brass knuckle. And lastly, the crossbow with the bayonet attachment basically has Commando Pro and can lunge 25% further distances than the combat knife. Now before everyone gets their knickers in a twist about pay to win and some of these being superior to the combat knife, let me mention 2 things briefly. First, I consider the crossbow an outlier, in that it's not technically a variant of the combat knife. The bayonet is an actual attachment, so I can see the justification for the increased lunge range and recovery speed. Since you have to spend an extra point in the created class, I can understand this added benefit. Now as for some of the melee weapons having faster rapid kill times than the combat knife, I definitely think this should not be the case, as it'll almost certainly add fuel to the fire for the pay to win debate. However, with that said, a Treyarch developer by the name of Tony, who actually oversees weapon design and balance, posted on Reddit the other day. His post was in response to Reddit user SwagMasterFlex, who pointed out the ridiculous speed of the Iron Gem. Tony's response was the following. In his post, he mentions that they agree the Iron Gym is swinging too fast and will be resolved in the next game update. He also mentions that the sword doesn't have any advantage over the combat knife, which is exactly what I found to be true as well. Lastly, he says Treyarch's goal with the melee weapons is to maintain balance so that players can make up their own minds about which they prefer, without feeling like they have to choose something because it's better. Sometimes, he says, this requires fine-tuning after release. And that post was 8 days ago. Since then, we've had at least one hot fix. My personal testing here was all done within the last 2 days, so I don't know if my results are after this fix he mentioned, or if he hasn't even done the fix yet. As of now, though, it's clear that some melee weapons offer a distinct advantage over the combat knife. How long this remains true, though, is anyone's guess. Hopefully my findings here can put to rest some of the claims out there. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of these results. And speaking of results, before the outro, I'll include a table that demonstrates all the numerical findings that I hand tested. In the meantime, I think I'm going to go watch that bayonet lunge on repeat and relive the Commando Pro perk in all its glory.